Let's talk about a battle that almost nobody knows about. Operation Abilene, March 1966. And before you click away thinking this is just another minor Vietnam skirmish, let me tell you something. This operation had everything. The First Infantry Division, the Big Red One, going toe-to-toe with an entire Viet Cong regiment. Massive firefights, hundreds of casualties, and a body count that would make headlines today. But back in '66, just another week in Vietnam. Here's what you need to understand about March 1966. The American ground war in Vietnam was still relatively new. The Marines had landed at Da Nang just 1 year earlier in March '65. The big army deployments had only started in mid-'65. So in March '66, we're talking about an American military that's still figuring out how to fight this war. Still learning the terrain, still understanding the enemy, still making mistakes that would cost lives. The 1st Infantry Division had arrived in Vietnam in October '65, the Big Red One of the most decorated divisions in American military history. These guys had fought in World War I, had stormed Omaha Beach on D-Day, had fought through France and Germany. They had history, they had tradition, they had pride. And in March '66, they were about to add another chapter to that history in the jungles and rubber plantations of South Vietnam. The division was based at Lai Khe, about 40 kilometers north of Saigon. Their area of operations was War Zone C and War Zone D. These weren't official designations. They were just what everyone called them. War Zone C was northwest of Saigon. War Zone D was northeast. Both were heavily controlled by the Viet Cong. Both were considered extremely dangerous. Both were areas where the enemy could mass forces, conduct operations, and retreat to safety. The 1st Infantry Division's job was to go into these war zones and destroy enemy forces. Simple. Mission. Brutal execution. Now, the enemy in this area wasn't just local Viet Cong guerrillas. We're talking about the 9th Viet Cong Division, a main force unit, organized like a regular army division, with regiments and battalions, with heavy weapons, with trained soldiers who'd been fighting for years. Some had fought the French. All of them knew the terrain intimately. All of them were committed, and all of them wanted to kill Americans. Intelligence in March '66 indicated that the 9th VC Division was operating in Phuoc Tuy Province, about 60 kilometers northeast of Saigon. The area was heavily forested, rubber plantations mixed with jungle, villages scattered throughout, rice paddies, rivers, terrain that heavily favored defenders and guerrilla fighters. Terrain that American forces hated because you couldn't see 50 meters in most places, because ambushes could come from anywhere, because the enemy knew every trail and hiding spot. The decision was made to conduct a major operation, go into Phuoc Tuy Province, find the 9th VC Division, engage them, destroy them. Classic search and destroy mission. The operation would involve multiple battalions from the 1st Infantry Division, thousands of American soldiers, supported by artillery and air power and armor, the largest operation the division had conducted since arriving in Vietnam. They called it Operation Abilene. The name came from Abilene, Kansas. Why? Who knows? Somebody in division headquarters probably thought it sounded tough. Operations got named all sorts of random things in Vietnam. Abilene was as good as any. The important thing wasn't the name, it was the mission. Go out there, find the enemy, kill them. That was it. That was always it in Vietnam. Body count was how success was measured. How many enemy soldiers you killed versus how many Americans died. The math was supposed to show we were winning. Supposed to prove that attrition would work. Supposed to demonstrate that American firepower could overcome any numerical advantage the enemy had. The soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division preparing for Operation Abilene were a mix. Some were veterans, had been in Vietnam for months, knew what they were doing, understood the enemy and the terrain. Others were fresh, right out of training, never been in combat, about to get a very rapid and very violent education in what war actually meant. Vietnam had a way of teaching you fast. You either learned or you died. There wasn't much middle ground. The weapons they carried were standard for '66, M14 rifles mostly. The M16 was just starting to be introduced, but most units still had the M14, 7.62 millimeter, 20-round magazine, semi-automatic, heavy but reliable, and it hit hard. Each soldier carried as much ammunition as he could, 200 rounds minimum, more if you thought you'd need it. Grenades, everybody carried grenades, smoke grenades for signaling, fragmentation grenades for killing, white phosphorus for marking targets, sea rations for food, water in canteens that tasted like plastic. All of this loaded into rucksacks that weighed 60 to 80 pounds, and you humped it through jungle and heat and humidity that would break most people. The machine gunners carried M60s, belt-fed 7.62 millimeter, the backbone of infantry firepower. Every squad had an M60. The gunner and his assistant gunner humped the weapon and hundreds of rounds of linked ammunition, heavy as hell, but worth every pound when the shooting started. The M60 could put out sustained fire that would suppress enemy positions and allow the riflemen to maneuver. It was loud, it was reliable most of the time, and it scared the enemy when they heard it open up. Artillery support for Operation Abilene would be massive. Multiple batteries of 105mm and 155mm howitzers, positioned at fire support bases, ready to provide fire missions on call. The artillery in Vietnam was incredibly responsive. You could call for fire and have rounds impacting within minutes, sometimes within seconds if the guns were already laid on pre-registered targets. The artillery would save countless American lives during Abilene, would break up enemy attacks, would destroy enemy positions, would turn the tide in firefights that could have gone either way. Air support was also on call. The Air Force and Army had aircraft ready to respond to troops in contact. Fighter bombers that could drop napalm and high-explosive bombs. Helicopter gunships that could make strafing runs with miniguns and rockets. The enemy feared American air power, knew that once aircraft showed up, they had to break contact and run or be destroyed. The air support was a massive advantage, a force multiplier that let smaller American units fight larger enemy forces and win. March 30th, 1966. That's when Operation Abilene kicked off. The First Infantry Division units moved out from their bases, some by truck convoy, some by helicopter, moving toward Phuoc Tuy Province, moving toward contact, moving toward what would become one of the first major battles between American Army units and main force Viet Cong. Nobody knew it yet, but Operation Abilene was about to get very, very bloody. The soldiers loading onto helicopters and trucks that morning had no idea what they were about to experience, had no idea that some of them would be dead within hours, had no idea that they were about to fight a battle that should be famous, but that history has mostly forgotten. Operation Abilene was beginning, and for the next 10 days, American soldiers and Viet Cong fighters would kill each other in staggering numbers in the jungles of Phuoc Tuy Province. This is that story. March 30th, 1966. Day 1 of Operation Abilene. Multiple battalions from the First Infantry Division were moving into the area of operations. The plan was to conduct sweeps, search for the enemy, make contact, destroy them. Standard search and destroy. But finding the enemy in Vietnam was always the hard part. The jungle was thick. The terrain was difficult. The enemy knew how to hide, knew how to avoid contact when they wanted to, knew when to fight and when to run. The 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry Regiment, part of the 1st Infantry Division, was moving through a rubber plantation. Rubber trees planted in neat rows by French colonists decades ago. The trees were mature now, tall, branches forming a canopy overhead. Underneath, visibility was better than in natural jungle, but still limited. You could see maybe 100 meters in some directions, 50 in others. Depended on the undergrowth and the layout of the trees. The battalion was moving in column, companies in line, platoons spread out. Standard movement formation. They'd been humping through the plantation for hours, hot, humid, over 100 degrees. The soldiers were drenched in sweat, drinking water, constantly, trying not to get heat exhaustion, trying to stay alert even though nothing had happened, even though the patrol seemed routine, even though the area seemed quiet. That's when the first shots rang out. AK-47 fire, multiple weapons. From the tree line ahead, The VC had set up an ambush, waited for the Americans to get close, then opened fire. The classic guerrilla tactic. Hit them when they're not expecting it, inflict casualties, withdraw before they can bring their firepower to bear. The lead company took the brunt of it. Multiple soldiers went down in the first seconds, killed or wounded. The rest hit the dirt. Returned fire. M14s barking. M60 machine guns opening up, suppressing the enemy positions. The company commander was on the radio immediately. Contact. Heavy contact. Need artillery support. Need air support. Estimate enemy strength at platoon-sized element. Maybe larger, can't tell yet. The firefight was intense. The VC had good positions. Were firing from cover. The Americans were in the open, exposed. Bad tactical situation. The platoon leaders were shouting orders. Suppress that tree line. Get the machine guns up. Call for artillery. Maneuver left. Flank them. All the things you're supposed to do when you make contact. But easier said than done when bullets are snapping past your head and guys are getting hit and everything is chaos and noise. The artillery came in fast. Fire mission, high explosive. The shells screamed overhead and impacted in and around the enemy positions. Trees shattered. Dirt geysered into the air. The VC fire slackened. The artillery was working, keeping their heads down, disrupting their positions, giving the Americans breathing room. But the VC weren't running. They were staying in position, fighting back. This wasn't a harassment attack. This was a prepared defense. The Americans were advancing into something bigger than a platoon-sized element. Intelligence had been wrong, or incomplete. There were more VC here than expected. A lot more. The battalion commander made the decision to commit more forces, sent another company to flank the enemy position, coordinate the attack, hit them from two directions, squeeze them, destroy them. Standard infantry tactics. Apply pressure from multiple directions, don't let them withdraw, destroy them in place. The flanking maneuver took time. Moving through rubber plantation while taking fire is slow, dangerous. But the company executed, got into position, opened fire on the enemy flank. Now the VC were taking fire from two directions. The situation was getting worse for them, but they still didn't withdraw, still kept fighting. These weren't local guerrillas who'd take a few shots and run. These were main force troops, trained, disciplined, willing to stand and fight even when the tactical situation was deteriorating. The firefight lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of continuous combat. Artillery pounding enemy positions, airstrikes coming in, dropping napalm that turned the jungle into an inferno. The VC finally broke contact, withdrew, melted back into the jungle, dragged their dead and wounded with them, left behind a battlefield littered with equipment and blood trails, but few bodies. The Americans controlled the ground, but the enemy had escaped, would live to fight another day. The battalion counted casualties, 7 killed, 23 wounded, significant losses for a single engagement. The first day of Operation Abilene, and already the butcher's bill was adding up. The enemy casualties were unknown. Blood trails indicated they'd taken losses. But how many? No way to tell. The VC were good at recovering their dead and wounded, made body counts difficult, made assessing the battle's outcome harder than it should be. But this first contact told the American commanders something important. The enemy was here, in strength, and they were willing to fight. Operation Abilene wasn't going to be a walk through the jungle. It was going to be a battle, a real battle, against a real enemy who knew what they were doing. The next 9 days would prove that assessment absolutely correct. The soldiers of 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry settled in for the night, established a defensive perimeter, dug fighting positions, set out claymores and trip flares, pulled security in shifts. Nobody slept well. Everyone was on edge. First combat is like that. Even when you win, even when you accomplish the mission, the adrenaline and fear and awareness that people just tried to kill you stays with you. Makes sleep difficult. Makes everything heightened. You hear every sound, see threats in every shadow. It takes time to adjust. Some guys never do. The wounded were evacuated by helicopter, medevac birds coming in after dark. Risky flying at night, but necessary. The wounded needed treatment, needed surgery, needed care that couldn't be provided in the field. The helicopters took them out, flew them to field hospitals. The doctors and nurses would do what they could. Some of the wounded would survive, some wouldn't. Combat medicine in Vietnam saved thousands of lives, but it couldn't save everyone. The dead were also evacuated. 7 bodies in bags, loaded onto helicopters, flown to Saigon, would be processed, would eventually be flown home. 7 families would get telegrams, 7 funerals would be held, 7 more names would join the over 58,000 Americans who die in Vietnam. But in March '66, the total was much lower. The war was just ramping up. The worst was still to come. Day 1 of Operation Abilene was over. First blood had been drawn. The Americans had won the tactical engagement, held the field, inflicted casualties on the enemy, accomplished the immediate mission, but at a cost. 7 dead, 23 wounded, and the knowledge that there were more VC out there, a lot more. And they'd be fighting again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, for the next 9 days. Operation Abilene had begun with fire and death, and it would continue that way, day after day. Contact after contact, firefight after firefight. The First Infantry Division was in for a fight, the kind of fight that would test them, that would cost lives, that would prove whether they were as good as their reputation suggested. The big red one was about to find out. March 31st, day 2 of Operation Abilene. The battalion spread out across the area of operations. Multiple units conducting sweeps, looking for the enemy, following up on yesterday's contact. Intelligence indicated the VC were still in the area, probably regrouping, probably preparing for more fighting. The Americans needed to find them before they could escape or reinforce or attack on their terms. 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry was moving through triple canopy jungle, not rubber plantation, natural jungle, the kind where you can't see more than 20 or 30 meters, where the vegetation is so thick you have to cut your way through in places, where the heat and humidity are suffocating, where every step is exhausting. This was Vietnam at its worst from a soldier's perspective, moving through terrain that was designed to kill you, even without an enemy present. The battalion was in column formation, moving slowly, carefully, everyone alert. Yesterday's contact had proven the enemy was here and willing to fight. Nobody wanted to walk into an ambush. Nobody wanted to be the guy in front when the shooting started. But somebody had to be on point. Somebody had to lead. That's how infantry works. The point element takes the most risk. But without them, the whole unit is blind. Around 1100 hours, 11 in the morning. The point element made contact. But this wasn't gunfire. This was something worse. Booby traps. The point man stepped on a pressure-detonated mine. An old French mine, probably. The VC were good at scavenging unexploded ordnance and turning it into traps. The mine detonated, killed the point man instantly, wounded 2 others who were close. The explosion echoed through the jungle, and then silence. Horrible silence, followed by screaming. The wounded screaming. The corpsmen running forward, everyone else taking cover, waiting for the ambush that usually followed a mine detonation. But no ambush came. Just the mine. Just the casualties. The unit consolidated, treated wounded, called for medevac. The point man's body was recovered, what was left of it. Mines are terrible weapons, indiscriminate, devastating. The VC used them extensively, planted them along trails, in villages, around American positions, anywhere Americans might walk. The casualties from mines and booby traps in Vietnam were staggering. Thousands of Americans killed or wounded by weapons that cost pennies to make and could be planted by anyone. The battalion continued moving, more carefully now. Everyone watching their step, watching for trip, wires, for disturbed earth, for anything that might indicate a mine. But you can't watch everything, can't see every trap. The VC were experts at camouflaging their mines and booby traps, made them nearly invisible. And the stress of constantly watching where you stepped, while also watching for enemy soldiers, while also humping a heavy pack through jungle in extreme heat was overwhelming. Men made mistakes, stepped wrong, triggered traps, and paid the price. 2 hours later, another mine. This one killed 2 soldiers, wounded 3. The battalion was being bled by booby traps, hadn't even made contact with enemy forces, just mines. The battalion commander was furious, frustrated, but what could he do? You couldn't artillery the entire jungle, couldn't clear every meter of ground by hand. You just had to keep moving, keep being careful, and accept that casualties from mines were part of operating in Vietnam. By nightfall on day 2, the battalion had lost 4 dead and 8 wounded, all to mines and booby traps. 0 contact with enemy soldiers. This was the hidden war in Vietnam, the war of mines and punji stakes and tripwires, the war that killed and maimed without glory, without combat, just sudden violence and death from invisible threats. The soldiers hated it, feared the ground they walked on, knew that any step could be their last. That was psychological warfare at its most effective, made every step an act of courage, made every patrol a nightmare of stress and fear. The battalion established a defensive perimeter for the night. In the jungle, no good defensive terrain, just carved out a space, set up positions, sent out listening posts, pulled security. The jungle at night in Vietnam was terrifying. You couldn't see anything. The darkness was absolute under the canopy. Sounds carried, animal sounds, insect sounds, and maybe enemy sounds. You couldn't tell. Your imagination created threats everywhere. Every snap of a twig was an enemy soldier. Every rustle in the brush was an attack. Most times it was nothing, but sometimes it wasn't. And you never knew until the shooting started. The night passed without incident, but nobody slept. Too much adrenaline, too much fear, too much awareness that they were deep in enemy territory surrounded by jungle and mines and an enemy that wanted them dead. Morning came as a relief. Light meant visibility, meant you could see threats, meant the terrible uncertainty of darkness was over, for now. Day 3 would bring more contacts, more casualties. The operation was settling into a pattern: move through difficult terrain, make contact with enemy forces or mines, fight, take casualties, move some more, repeat. The grinding, attritional warfare that characterized much of Vietnam, not the dramatic battles that make headlines, just constant low-intensity combat that wore down units and killed soldiers steadily. Death by 1,000 cuts. That was Operation Abilene for many of the soldiers involved. And it was only day 3, 7 more days to go. 7 more days of mines and ambushes and heat and fear. 7 more days of wondering if today would be the day. If this patrol would be the one where you didn't come back. That was the reality of Operation Abilene. Not heroic, not glorious, just brutal and exhausting and deadly. The jungle was swallowing them whole, and there was no escape, no choice but to keep moving, keep fighting, keep surviving, until the operation ended or you became a casualty. Those were the only options, and every soldier knew it. April 2nd, day 4 of Operation Abilene. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Infantry, received orders to search a village cluster, 3 small villages in close proximity. Intelligence indicated possible VC presence. Maybe supplies cached there. Maybe enemy soldiers using the villages as bases. The battalion would conduct a cordon and search. Surround the villages, search every building, question every civilian, find whatever the VC were, hiding. The battalion approached the villages at dawn, standard operating procedure. Hit villages early before people are awake, before they can hide things or send warnings. The companies spread out, surrounded the villages, established a perimeter. Then the search teams went in, moving house to house, checking bunkers, looking in rice stores, searching for weapons or supplies or anything that would indicate VC activity. The villages were empty, not deserted, but almost. A few old people, a few women and small children. All the military-age males were gone. All the young women were gone. Most of the population that should have been there was missing. This was a bad sign, meant the VC had been warned, meant they'd evacuated everyone who might be combatants or who might know something useful, meant the Americans were walking into a setup. The search continued anyway. The old people and women were gathered in the village center, questioned through interpreters. Nobody knew anything. Nobody had seen VC. Nobody knew where the men had gone. Just the usual lies and non-cooperation. The Americans had heard it all before. Standard procedure when searching VC-controlled villages. Nobody ever knew anything. Nobody ever helped. They were caught between two sides, and helping either one could get you killed, so they helped neither, just tried to survive. The search teams found bunkers, lots of bunkers, interconnected, some with supplies, rice, medical equipment, ammunition. This had been a VC logistics site, probably still was, but the VC had cleared out the important stuff before the Americans arrived. Left some supplies behind that were expendable, took everything valuable, standard procedure on their part. Then the artillery started falling, mortar rounds landing in the village. The VC were attacking, using mortars positioned outside the American perimeter, dropping rounds on the soldiers searching the village. The Americans scattered, took cover, started taking. Casualties. The VC mortar teams were good, accurate. They'd had time to register their mortars on the village, knew exactly where to drop rounds for maximum effect, and they were hitting Americans. The American artillery responded, counter-battery fire, trying to locate and destroy the enemy mortars. But the VC mortar teams were mobile. Fire a few rounds, displace, fire again from a different position, hard to target, hard to kill. They kept dropping mortars on the village for 20 minutes, killed 3 Americans, wounded 15, then stopped, packed up their mortars, disappeared into the jungle, mission accomplished. They'd hit the Americans, inflicted casualties, and gotten away clean. The battalion commander made a decision. Burn the villages. The villages were clearly VC infrastructure, logistics sites. The Americans would deny them to the enemy. The order went out. Burn it. The soldiers set fire to the hooches, used thermite grenades and white phosphorus. The villages burned. The civilians watched. Some cried. Some just stared with flat, hate-filled eyes. Their homes were being destroyed. Their rice stores were going up in smoke. The Americans were trying to deny resources to the enemy, but the civilians were the ones who'd suffer. They'd have nowhere to live, nothing to eat, and the VC would use this, would tell everyone that this is what Americans do. They burn your homes, destroy your property, don't care about Vietnamese lives, only care about killing. Join us, fight them, drive them out. The Hearts and Minds campaign took another hit. You couldn't win hearts and minds by burning villages, couldn't create support for the South Vietnamese government by making people homeless. But the military logic was clear. Deny the enemy resources, destroy their infrastructure, make it harder for them to operate. The fact that it turned civilians against the Americans was a price the command was willing to pay. Whether that was smart strategically is debatable. But in April '66, nobody was questioning it. The mission was to destroy enemy capability. And that's what burning the villages accomplished. Whether it was worth the political cost wouldn't be clear for years. The battalion moved out, left the burning villages behind, continued the operation. The smoke rising into the sky could be seen for kilometers, a marker of where Americans had been, what they'd done. The civilians trudged away, carrying what possessions they could, heading toward other villages, toward relatives, toward anywhere that wasn't here. They were refugees now. War refugees created by an operation designed to protect them. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but orders were orders. The mission was the mission, and Operation Abilene continued. Day 4 ended with more casualties, more firefights, more mines. The pattern was established. The operation was achieving its objectives. Enemy forces were being engaged. Infrastructure was being destroyed. But the cost was mounting. 10 Americans dead so far. Over 50 wounded. The enemy casualties were estimated at over 60 killed, but those were estimates, body counts, numbers that might be accurate or might be inflated or might be completely wrong. There was no way to verify. The VC took their dead with them when possible, hid casualties, made counting difficult. So the numbers were always questionable. The village that vanished became a symbol of the challenge facing American forces in Vietnam. You couldn't hold ground, couldn't occupy every village. The VC would just wait you out, would return as soon as you left, would rebuild, would re-establish control. The cycle would repeat. The Americans could win every tactical engagement, could destroy every village, could kill thousands of enemy soldiers, and it wouldn't matter strategically if they couldn't permanently secure the population, if they couldn't break the VC grip on the villages, if they couldn't win the political war while fighting the military war. Operation Abilene was demonstrating this problem clearly. Military success, political failure, that would characterize much of the American effort in Vietnam. And Operation Abilene was a perfect example of it. The village that vanished, the civilians made homeless, The VC who escaped and would fight another day. All of it a microcosm of the larger war. A war that would be lost despite tactical victories, despite brave soldiers doing their jobs, despite everything being done right at the tactical level. Sometimes right tactics can't overcome wrong strategy. Vietnam would prove that conclusively. And Operation Abilene was an early indicator of that fundamental problem. April 3rd, Day 5 of Operation Abilene. 1st Battalion, 16th Infantry got orders to move from their current position to link up with another unit about 5 kilometers away. Simple movement operation. Should take a few hours. March through the jungle, link up, consolidate for the next phase of the operation. Routine. Except nothing was routine in Vietnam, especially not in an area where the VC had major forces operating. The battalion moved out in column formation, 4 companies, over 600 men, strung out over a kilometer of jungle trail. Moving tactically, but moving. They had ground to cover, a timetable to meet. You couldn't move too slowly, or you'd never accomplish the mission. But you couldn't move too fast, or you'd blunder into an ambush. It was a balance, and getting it right was the difference between life and death. The trail they were following was obvious, well used, which was suspicious. In Vietnam, well-used trails were often ambush sites. The VC would watch a trail, see that Americans were using it, set up an ambush, wait, kill Americans. Standard tactic. Everyone knew it. But sometimes you had to use the trails anyway, because the alternative was cutting through virgin jungle, which was so slow that operational requirements made it impossible. So you used the trails, and you hoped you'd spot the ambush before you walked into it, and you hoped that if you didn't spot it, you'd be able to fight your way out. Hope was a big part of infantry tactics in Vietnam. Hope and luck. Skills and training were important. But sometimes it came down to luck. Were you at the front of the column when the ambush was triggered, or at the back where you might not get hit? Pure luck. Nothing you could control. The lead company was halfway down a stretch of trail flanked by thick jungle on both sides. Perfect ambush terrain. The company commander knew it. Had his men spread out. Had flankers out. Had everyone on high alert. But you can't see everything. Can't spot every threat. The VC were experts at camouflage, at blending into the jungle, at being invisible until they wanted to be seen. The ambush was massive. Both sides of the trail erupted simultaneously. Machine guns, AK-47s, RPGs. Claymore mines detonated electrically. The kill zone became a slaughter zone. The lead company was hit hard, very hard. Dozens of men went down in the first seconds. The VC had set this up perfectly. Had positions prepared, had fields of fire cleared, had practiced this, and they were executing it flawlessly. The Americans tried to return fire, but they were pinned. The volume of enemy fire was overwhelming. The VC had at least company strength in the ambush, maybe more, and they were in good positions while the Americans were in the kill zone, exposed, taking casualties. The platoon leaders were trying to organize a response, but it was chaos. Men screaming, wounded calling for medics, the radio operator trying to call for support, machine guns hammering, RPGs exploding. This was hell, pure hell. The battalion commander, 2 companies back, heard the firing, knew immediately what had happened. Ambush, big one. He started giving orders. 2nd company, move up, flank left. 3rd company, flank right. Artillery, fire mission. Suppress those tree lines. Air support. We need it now. Get gunships here. Get fast movers. We need everything. Now. The radio operators were calling it in. The artillery battery responded. Rounds were on the way. But the lead company didn't have minutes to wait. They needed help now. This second. Or they'd be annihilated. The company commander of the lead company made a decision. A desperate decision. But the only option he had. Assault through the ambush. Don't sit in the kill zone and die. Charge. Get into the enemy positions. Make it a close quarters fight. The VC ambush was designed for long-range fire. If the Americans could close the distance, get into the enemy positions, the VC advantage would disappear. It was a terrible plan. Suicidal, really. But staying put was certain death. Assault had a chance. A small chance. But a chance. He gave the order, on my command. Assault the tree line. Everyone up. Charge. Fire as you move. Get into their positions. Do it now. And they did. It. The Marines who could still move got up, charged the tree line, firing their M14s, throwing grenades, screaming. Some fell, hit by enemy fire, but others kept going, reached the tree line, got into the VC positions. And now it was hand-to-hand, close quarters, brutal. Rifles used as clubs, bayonets, fighting in bunkers and trenches. The kind of fighting that's primal, that strips away all civilization and reduces combat to its most basic elements. Kill or be killed. Nothing else matters. Nothing else exists. The artillery started impacting, not on the enemy positions where Americans were now fighting, but on the rear areas, where VC reinforcements might be, where their command element might be. The artillery was boxing them in, preventing reinforcement, preventing withdrawal. The gunships arrived, making strafing runs on the flanks, miniguns screaming, rockets impacting. The VC were being hit from multiple directions now. The ambush was falling apart. The Americans had turned it into a close-quarters brawl. The artillery and air support were preventing the VC from reinforcing or escaping. The tactical situation was reversing. The other companies were moving up, flanking, getting into position to assault the VC positions from the sides. Coordinated attack. Multiple companies hitting the enemy from different directions. The VC were tough, fought hard, but they were being overwhelmed. The Americans had more men, more firepower. And once the initial shock of the ambush was overcome, once they'd gotten organized, the outcome was inevitable. The VC started withdrawing, pulling back, disappearing into the jungle, dragging dead and wounded. They'd hurt the Americans badly, but they hadn't destroyed them. And now they were taking significant casualties themselves. By the time the fighting stopped, 90 minutes after it started, the battlefield was horrific. American casualties were terrible. 22 dead, over 60 wounded. The lead company had been decimated. Over a third casualties, but they'd survived. They'd fought through an ambush that should have destroyed them, had turned it into a fight, had held until support arrived. The courage displayed was extraordinary. Men advancing under fire, charging enemy positions, fighting hand-to-hand. That's not something you can train. That's character. That's will. That's refusing to die even when everything says you should. The enemy casualties were estimated at over 40 killed, bodies left on the battlefield, blood trails indicating more wounded dragged away. The VC had lost their ambush, had failed to destroy the American company, had taken significant casualties. But they'd survived, would regroup, would fight another day. That was the frustration. You could win the engagement, kill more enemy than you lost, and they'd still be out there, still be a threat, still be fighting, because they had the will to continue, had the commitment, had the support of the population, or at least their fear. Breaking that was the real challenge, and it couldn't be done through military means alone. The wounded were evacuated, helicopters coming in to pick them up, flying them to hospitals. Some would survive, some wouldn't. The dead were also evacuated. 22 more bodies, 22 more telegrams, 22 more families destroyed. The living treated their own wounds as best they could, redistributed ammunition, reorganized, prepared to continue the mission. Because Operation Abilene wasn't over. Wasn't even half over. 5 more days of this. 5 more days of patrols and ambushes and firefights. 5 more days of dying. Day 5 had been the bloodiest so far. Ambush Alley had earned its name in blood. American blood and Vietnamese blood mixed in the mud of a jungle trail that nobody back home had ever heard of, and never would. Just another unnamed place where Americans fought and died in a war that was just ramping up. That would get worse before it got better. That would claim over 58,000 American lives before it ended. 22 of those lives were claimed on April 3rd, 1966, in an ambush on a jungle trail during Operation Abilene. Their names would go on the wall, would be read on memorial days, would be remembered by families who never fully recovered from their loss. That was the cost of Ambush Alley, a cost paid in full in blood and grief. April 4th, Day 6 of Operation Abilene. The battalions had been in continuous operations for almost a week. Constant patrolling, constant contact, constant casualties. The men were exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination. Food was sea rations eaten cold. Sleep was a few hours grabbed in fighting positions. Hygiene was non-existent. They were filthy, covered in mud and sweat and blood, uniforms rotting from the humidity, boots falling apart, but they kept fighting, because that's what you do, because the mission continues, because your buddies need you. So you keep going, even when everything in your body says, stop. The decision was made to establish a fire base, a temporary artillery position deep in the area of operations. Bring in 105mm howitzers, set up a defended perimeter. The artillery would provide closer support to the infantry units, respond faster to fire missions, provide more accurate fires because they'd be closer to the targets. It made tactical sense, would save lives, would make operations more effective. The site selected was a small clearing in the jungle, maybe 200 meters across, just big enough for the artillery pieces and the infantry company that would defend them. Helicopters brought in the guns, CH-47 Chinooks carrying them slung underneath. The heavy lift birds brought them in, one at a time, landed carefully, unhooked the artillery pieces, lifted off to get the next one. It took most of the day to get all 4 guns in position, plus the ammunition and the gun crews. The infantry company establishing the perimeter was Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 2nd Infantry. About 120 men. They'd been fighting for 6 days straight, lost men to combat and disease and accidents. We're down to maybe 100 effectives, tired men. But they had a job to do, establish defensive positions, clear fields of fire, set up bunkers, string wire, position claymores, make the fire base defensible, because everyone knew the VC would attack it. A fire base was a high-value target. The VC hated American artillery, knew it was devastating, knew that destroying guns would hurt American operations, so they'd attack. It was just a question of when. The fire base went up fast. Combat engineers helped, bulldozers clearing fields of fire, the infantry digging fighting positions, the artillery crews setting up their guns, registering targets, preparing for fire missions. By nightfall, the fire base was functional. Not perfect, not as strong as it should be, but functional. The guns could fire. The infantry could defend. It would have to do. Night fell. The fire base went on alert. Everyone in position, weapons loaded, claymores wired, flares ready, listening, waiting. The jungle at night is alive with sounds, insects, animals. The wind in the trees. Every sound could be the enemy. Could be an attack developing. You had to filter out the normal sounds, listen for the abnormal, the sound of equipment, of weapons being positioned, of whispered commands. That took experience. The veterans could do it, could tell when something was wrong. The new guys couldn't. They'd hear every noise and think it was the enemy, would be terrified all night, would learn eventually, or they'd die. Those were the options. 0200 hours, 2 in the morning, the attack came, mortars first, dropping on the fire base. The VC had scouted the position during the day, knew exactly where it was, had registered their mortars. The rounds fell with terrible accuracy, right on the gun positions, right on the defensive positions. Men died in their bunkers, killed by mortar fragments. Others were wounded. The fire base erupted in chaos, everyone taking cover, medics running to wounded, the gun crews trying to get to their artillery pieces, to return fire, to do their jobs even while being shelled. Then the ground assault. The VC came out of the jungle, charging the perimeter, hundreds of them, a full battalion at least, screaming, firing, throwing grenades, satchel charges. They'd come to destroy the fire base, to kill every American, to capture or destroy the artillery pieces. This was a major attack, coordinated, well planned, and it was hitting hard. The Americans returned fire, M14s on full magazine, machine guns hammering. The claymores were detonated, steel balls scything through the attacking forces. Men fell, but others kept coming, got to the wire, started cutting through, got into the perimeter in some places. Hand-to-hand fighting, brutal, desperate. The Americans were outnumbered, taking casualties, being pushed back in places. The fire base was in danger of being overrun. The artillery crews turned their guns on the attacking forces, fired beehive rounds, anti-personnel ammunition, thousands of steel darts fired like a giant shotgun. devastating at close range. The darts tore through the VC assault waves, killed dozens, broke up the attacks. The artillery pieces that were supposed to support infantry operations were now defending themselves. Direct fire, point blank. The crews were loading and firing as fast as they could. Didn't matter where they aimed, just point the gun at attacking soldiers and fire. The Beehive rounds did the rest. American air support arrived, flare ships dropping illumination, turning night into day, revealing the VC forces in the open, gunships making runs, miniguns and rockets devastating the attacking forces, fast movers dropping bombs and napalm on suspected VC positions outside the perimeter. The firebase had called for everything, every asset, every aircraft, every piece of support available. And it was coming. The Air Force and Army Aviation responded like always. Troops in contact got priority. Everything else stopped. Get to the firebase. Support them. Keep them alive. The VC attack continued for 2 hours, wave after wave. They'd committed major forces, couldn't withdraw without achieving something, so they kept coming, kept dying. The Americans were taking casualties, but they held. Every position held. When one position was hit hard, others would shift fire to support. When ammunition ran low in one area, soldiers would redistribute from others. The NCOs and officers were everywhere, encouraging men, directing fire, organizing the defense. That's leadership. That's what makes the difference between units that hold and units that break. Leadership. And Charlie Company had it. By 0400 hours, the VC were pulling back, withdrawing. They'd failed, hadn't overrun the fire base, hadn't destroyed the guns, hadn't achieved their objective. They'd taken massive casualties. Bodies littered the approaches to the fire base. Blood trails led back into the jungle. The Americans had held, but at a cost. 13 dead, 31 wounded. The company was down to maybe 60 effectives. They'd lost almost half their strength defending the fire base, but they'd won. The fire base was intact. The guns were operational. The mission was accomplished. As dawn broke, the scene around the fire base was nightmarish. Over 80 VC bodies counted, probably twice that killed with the bodies dragged away. Wounded VC left behind, captured. They'd talk eventually, provide intelligence. The Americans had won a significant tactical victory, had defended successfully against a major attack, had killed large numbers of the enemy. By the metrics of Vietnam, this was success. But it didn't feel like success to the men of Charlie Company. Didn't feel like victory when a third of your friends were dead or wounded. When you'd spent 2 hours fighting for your life. When you'd seen things that would stay with you forever. Victory in Vietnam was complicated. You could win and lose at the same time. Win tactically. Lose pieces of your soul. That was the reality of combat. The reality that nobody who hasn't experienced it can fully understand. The fire base would remain operational for the rest of Operation Abilene, would provide artillery support to continuing operations, would save American lives with accurate, responsive fires. The defense of the fire base would be studied, used as a training example. How to defend a fire base against a major attack. What worked? What could be improved? The tactical lessons would be documented and disseminated, would make future operations more successful. But for the men of Charlie Company, the fire base was just another hellish night in Vietnam. Another battle survived. Another set of memories that would never fully fade. Another night that would replay in nightmares for years. That was the cost of defending the fire base. A cost paid in blood and trauma that statistics could never capture. April 5th, Day 7 of Operation Abilene. The operation was evolving. The initial sweeps had made contact with enemy forces, had inflicted casualties, had disrupted VC operations. Now the focus shifted. Hunt down the remnants. Find the VC units that had been engaged. Finish them. Don't let them escape and recover. Pursue, destroy. Complete the mission. Bravo. Company 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry got orders to track a VC unit that had been in contact the previous day. Blood trails led into the jungle. The VC had taken casualties, were probably moving slowly, carrying wounded, maybe low on ammunition, vulnerable, perfect target for a pursuit. Find them, hit them, destroy them before they could reach safety. Bravo Company moved out, following the blood trail, moving fast, trying to close the distance, trying to catch the VC before they could escape. The company commander was aggressive, pushed his men hard, knew that speed was critical, that every hour of delay gave the enemy time to escape or prepare defenses. So they pushed, humped through the jungle at a pace that was exhausting. But they were motivated, they were hunting, and hunters have energy that defenders don't. The prospect of catching the enemy, of finishing the job, that drove them forward. The trail was clear, blood, discarded equipment, signs of wounded being carried or dragged. The VC weren't trying to hide their trail, couldn't hide it. Were just trying to get away, get to a safe area, regroup, treat their wounded, resupply. The Americans were closing, gaining on them. The chase was on around 1400 hours, 2 in the afternoon. The point element made contact. The VC had stopped, set up a hasty defense. Were going to fight, maybe didn't have a choice. Maybe the wounded couldn't go farther. Maybe they'd decided to stand and inflict casualties on their pursuers. Whatever the reason, they'd stopped running and started fighting. The initial contact was sharp, heavy fire from prepared positions. The VC had used their time well, dug in, positioned machine guns, prepared the position as best they could in the time available. They were going to make the Americans pay to overrun them. Were going to sell their lives dearly, or at least delay the Americans long enough to get their wounded away. This was a rear guard action, a delaying fight. The VC weren't trying to win, just trying to buy time. Bravo Company deployed, suppressed the enemy positions with machine gun fire, called for artillery, prepared to assault, standard infantry tactics. But as they were organizing the assault, the situation changed. The VC weren't just defending, they were part of a trap, and Bravo Company had just walked into it. Fire erupted from the flanks, from positions that hadn't been there or hadn't revealed themselves before. More VC fresh troops, not wounded, not depleted, a full-strength unit. The hunter had become the hunted. Bravo Company was now in the middle, taking fire from 3 directions. The ambush had been set perfectly. The blood trail had been bait. The rear guard was the lure. And Bravo Company had taken it, had walked right into a prepared ambush. The company commander realized what had happened instantly. They'd been suckered, were in a bad position, needed to break contact, withdraw, couldn't stay here, would be destroyed if they didn't move. He gave orders, suppress all enemy positions, artillery on the flanks, air support, everything. We're pulling back, covering fire, leapfrog withdrawal, by squads, move, now. The withdrawal under fire is one of the hardest military maneuvers. You're moving away from the enemy while they're shooting at you. You have to maintain fire discipline, can't just run, have to move tactically, covering each other, suppressing enemy positions while elements move. Then those elements stop and provide cover while others move. Leapfrog, back and back. Maintaining formation, maintaining fire, not breaking, not running, just tactically withdrawing. It requires discipline, training, leadership. Bravo. Company had all 3. The artillery came in danger close, walking back with the withdrawing company, suppressing enemy positions, keeping VC heads down, giving the company breathing room. The air support arrived. Gunships making runs on the flanking positions. Fixed-wing aircraft dropping ordnance on suspected VC concentrations. The combined firepower was devastating. Broke up the VC attack. Allowed Bravo Company to withdraw without being overrun. The withdrawal took 90 minutes. 90 minutes of continuous fighting while moving. Men were hit, went down, were dragged along by buddies. Nobody left behind. Dead and wounded both evacuated with the unit. The VC pursued, tried to cut off the withdrawal, tried to get ahead and ambush again. But the artillery and air support prevented it, kept them at bay, allowed the company to break contact and reach a defensive position. Once in the defensive position, Bravo Company counted casualties. 8 dead, 27 wounded, over a quarter of the company. The trap had been costly, but they'd survived, had broken contact, had gotten out. The alternative would have been annihilation, complete destruction of the company. That hadn't happened. Credit to the company commander for recognizing the situation and acting decisively. Credit to the soldiers for maintaining discipline during a withdrawal under fire. Credit to the artillery and air support for responding rapidly and accurately. All of it together saved the company. Take away any one element and the outcome could have been very different. The VC casualties from the engagement were unknown. They'd been in good positions, protected. The American casualties were mostly from the initial contact and the withdrawal. The VC, probably, took some losses from artillery and airstrikes. But probably not catastrophic. They'd set the trap well, executed it well, failed to destroy the American company, but hurt them significantly. From their perspective, probably a successful operation. The hunter becomes the hunted was a harsh lesson. The enemy in Vietnam wasn't stupid, wasn't incompetent. They could set traps, could plan operations, could fight smart. The American technological and firepower advantages were real, but they didn't make the enemy incompetent, didn't mean you could be careless, didn't mean you could chase enemy forces without considering that you might be walking into a trap. Bravo Company learned that lesson the hard way, lost men learning it, but they learned, would be more careful in the future, would respect the enemy's capabilities. That knowledge was bought in blood, but it was knowledge that would save lives later. That was the grim calculus of combat, learn or die. Bravo Company learned, and they'd survive. Day 7 of Operation Abilene was another hard day, another day of casualties, another day of lessons written in blood. 3 more days to go, 3 more days of fighting, then Operation Abilene would end, and the survivors could go back to base, could rest, could grieve, could try to process what they'd experienced until the next operation. Because there was always a next operation, always more fighting, always more dying. That was Vietnam, that was 1966. And that was the reality for the soldiers of the First Infantry Division fighting Operation Abilene. April 6th, Day 8 of Operation Abilene. A battalion-sized operation was planned. Multiple companies coordinating, sweep through a suspected VC base area, destroy infrastructure, engage any enemy forces encountered. Large-scale operation, well-planned, should work. But in Vietnam, plans had a way of falling apart the moment contact was made. The operation began at dawn. 3 companies moving in. Coordinated sweeps. Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie companies from 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry. Spread across a front several kilometers wide. Staying in radio contact. Supporting each other. Moving through jungle and rubber plantation. Looking for the enemy. Looking for bunkers and caches. Looking for anything. Alpha Company made contact first. Around 0900 hours, 9 in the morning. Heavy contact, AK fire and RPGs from concealed positions. The company deployed, returned fire, called for artillery support, standard procedure. They'd fought this fight before, knew what to do, suppress the enemy, call for support, maneuver, destroy them, by the book. But this time was different. The enemy wasn't a small unit, wasn't a platoon or even a company. As Alpha Company engaged, more and more enemy positions revealed themselves. This was a battalion, maybe more. The Americans had stumbled into a major enemy force, the kind of force that could destroy a company if not handled correctly. Alpha Company was in trouble, big trouble. The company commander called it in. Heavy contact, battalion-size enemy force, need reinforcement, need air support, need everything. The call went up the chain. Battalion commander heard it, made decisions. Send Bravo and Charlie companies. Move them toward Alpha, artillery, maximum fires, air support. Get everything to Alpha's position. Broken arrow, that was the code. Broken arrow, troops in contact. Friendly unit in danger of being overrun. Drop everything and support them. That's what broken arrow meant. Every asset, every aircraft, every piece of artillery. Get it to Alpha Company. Now. Alpha Company was fighting for its life. The enemy had them in a bad position. Were attacking from multiple directions. The company was taking heavy casualties. Men going down everywhere. The medics overwhelmed. Wounded everywhere. The company was being torn apart. They needed help. Needed it desperately. And they needed it now. Not in an hour. Not in 30 minutes. Now, this minute. Or they'd be annihilated. The artillery came first. Every gun in range, firing for effect. High explosive shells raining down around Alpha Company's position. Danger close. Some rounds impacting within 50 meters of friendly troops. Shrapnel flying everywhere, but necessary. The artillery was the only thing keeping the enemy from overrunning the position. was keeping them back, killing them in large numbers, breaking up their attacks. Without the artillery, Alpha Company would already be dead. Bravo and Charlie companies were moving as fast as they could, running through the jungle, heading toward Alpha's position, toward the sound of firing, toward their brothers who were dying. They covered 2 kilometers in 20 minutes, an incredible pace through jungle, men collapsing from heat exhaustion. But they kept going, because Alpha needed them, because Marines don't abandon each other, because that's what you do. The air support arrived, everything. Helicopter gunships, fixed-wing fighters, B-52 bombers were diverted. Massive air power was being brought to bear. The sky filled with aircraft, all focused on one objective: save Alpha Company, destroy the enemy forces attacking them. The pilots could see the situation on the ground, could see Americans fighting desperately, could see they were surrounded, could see the urgency. They didn't hesitate, made run after run. Guns, rockets, bombs, napalm, everything. The jungle around Alpha Company became an inferno. Bravo Company hit the enemy flank first, assault right into the enemy positions. Didn't slow down, didn't deploy carefully, just charged, firing, throwing grenades. They had to relieve the pressure on Alpha, had to create confusion in the enemy ranks, had to disrupt their attack, and they did. The sudden assault from an unexpected direction threw the VC off balance. They'd been focused on destroying Alpha, hadn't expected another American company to hit. Their flank, didn't have positions prepared, were caught in the open. Charlie Company hit from the other side, coordinated assault. Now the VC were being hit from 3 directions. Alpha Company from the center, Bravo and Charlie from the flanks. The tables had turned. The VC were now the ones surrounded, the ones taking fire from multiple directions, the ones being destroyed. They tried to withdraw, tried to break contact, but the American artillery and air support prevented it, sealed off escape routes, trapped them, and then methodically destroyed them. The battle lasted 6 hours, 6 hours of continuous combat, the most intense fighting of Operation Abilene, the most sustained, the highest casualties. When it was finally over, when the VC had been killed or had escaped, the battlefield was a scene of devastation. The jungle was churned up by artillery and bombs. Trees were shattered, craters everywhere, and bodies, so many bodies, American and Vietnamese, mixed together in death. Alpha Company had been devastated, 31 killed, over 60 wounded. The company had essentially been destroyed as a fighting unit, 2/3 casualties. It would take months to rebuild, to replace the dead and wounded, to absorb new soldiers, to become combat effective again. But they'd survived, broken but not destroyed, hurt but not annihilated. The broken arrow had worked, the support had arrived in time, barely, but in time. The enemy casualties were staggering, over 200 confirmed killed, bodies left on the battlefield, probably another 100 or more wounded dragged away. The VC battalion that had attacked Alpha Company had been destroyed, rendered combat ineffective. It would be months before they could rebuild and return to operations. This was the kind of tactical victory the Americans needed, the kind that attrition warfare was based on. Kill more enemy than you lose. Do it consistently. Eventually you win. That was the theory. Whether it actually worked was a different question. Broken Arrow on day 8 of Operation Abilene was the climax of the operation. The biggest battle, the highest casualties, the most dramatic. It would be written up, studied, used as a training example, how to respond to a broken arrow call, how to support units in contact, how combined arms, artillery, and air and infantry could destroy a numerically superior enemy force. All the lessons were there, but so were the costs. 31 dead Americans, families destroyed, young men who'd never come home. That was real. That was permanent. That was the price paid for the tactical victory. A price that had to be remembered even while celebrating the outcome. Because forgetting the cost would dishonor those who paid it, would make their sacrifice meaningless. The soldiers of Alpha Company who died on April 6, 1966, deserve to be remembered, deserve to have their story told, deserve to be honored. Not just as statistics, not just as a body, count, but as individual human beings who gave their lives in service to their country. That's the least we can do. the absolute least. April 7th, Day 9 of Operation Abilene. The operation was winding down. 2 more days, then the units would pull out. Return to base. The last 2 days would be final sweeps, clearing the area, looking for any remaining enemy forces, documenting what had been accomplished, preparing for withdrawal. Less intense than the previous days, lower tempo, but still dangerous, still combat operations, still men dying. Multiple units were conducting final patrols, moving through areas already swept, following up on intelligence, checking villages one more time, looking for anything missed. The operations were methodical, careful. Nobody wanted to be the last casualty of Operation Abilene. Nobody wanted to die on Day 9 when the operation was almost over. But war doesn't care about timing, doesn't care that an operation is ending. The bullets still fly. The mines still explode. Men still die regardless of whether it's Day 1 or Day 9. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Infantry, was sweeping through a village cluster they'd searched earlier in the operation, looking for VC who might have returned, looking for weapons or supplies that might have been hidden. The village was quiet, seemed peaceful. The civilians were back, working in the rice paddies, going about their lives, acted like nothing had happened, like there hadn't been a war raging around them for 9 days. Maybe that was their coping mechanism. Pretend it wasn't happening. Focus on survival. Don't take sides. Just endure. The search was routine at first. Standard procedure, check bunkers, question civilians, look for anything suspicious, finding nothing. The village appeared clean. No weapons, no supplies, no evidence of VC presence. The battalion was about to move on, head to the next location, continue the sweep. That's when the mine went off. A soldier stepped on a buried mine. Chinese manufacture, pressure detonated. The explosion killed him instantly, wounded 2 others nearby. The patrol froze, everyone looking for more mines, for tripwires, for anything that might indicate more booby traps. The area was probably mined. The VC had time to prepare, time to plant mines, and they'd done it. Turned the village into a minefield. The battalion commander made a decision, pull out. The village wasn't worth it. Wasn't worth losing more men to mines on Day 9 of the operation. They'd swept it, found nothing. 1 casualty was already too many, no point risking more. Pull everyone out, move to a different area, continue operations elsewhere. The order went out. Withdraw from the village, carefully. Watch every step. Don't touch anything, just get out. The withdrawal was nerve-wracking. Every step could trigger a mine. Every movement could be your last. The soldiers moved like they were walking on eggshells, slow, careful, eyes on the ground, looking for disturbed earth, for tripwires, for anything. It took an hour to withdraw a distance that should have taken 10 minutes, but everyone got out. No more casualties, just the 1 KIA and 2 wounded. The village was left behind, still mined, still dangerous, a problem for someone else to deal with. Or maybe it would never be dealt with. Maybe the mines would just stay there, waiting, for years, for decades, killing Vietnamese civilians long after the war ended. That's the legacy of mines. They don't stop killing when the war ends. They keep killing, indiscriminately, forever, or until someone removes them, which often never happens. The day continued with more patrols, more sweeps. Contact was light. A few sniper shots, some small firefights, nothing major. The VC seemed to be avoiding contact. Maybe they'd had enough. Maybe they'd taken so many casualties that they were preserving what was left. Maybe they were just waiting for the Americans to leave so they could move back in. Whatever the reason, the fighting on Day 9 was lighter than previous days, which was a relief. Everyone was exhausted, done with Operation Abilene, ready to go back to base, rest, recover, process what had happened. The casualty count for Day 9 was mercifully low. 2 killed, 8 wounded. Compared to previous days, almost nothing. But 2 killed meant 2 more telegrams, 2 more funerals, 2 more families destroyed. The numbers being small didn't make it hurt less for those families. Didn't make the loss any more bearable. Their sons were just as dead as the ones killed on Day 1 or Day 8. The timing didn't matter. The circumstances didn't matter. Dead is dead. And grief is grief. And loss is permanent. As Day 9 ended, the units began preparing for extraction. Final operations would be on day 10. Then helicopters would come, would take them out, back to base, back to something resembling normalcy. Hot food, showers, clean uniforms, sleep in bunks instead of holes. In the ground, the simple comforts of base life that they had been without for 10 days. It seemed like luxury, like paradise. When you've been living in the jungle, eating cold sea rations and fighting for your life, a shower and a hot meal seem like the greatest things in the world. Perspective. Combat gives you perspective on what really matters, what's important. And it's not the things you thought were important before. It's the basics. Food, water, safety, sleep. Your buddy's alive and healthy. That's it. Everything else is details. Day 9 was the calm before the end, the winding down, the beginning of the transition from combat operations back to garrison life. But that transition was harder than it seemed. You couldn't just flip a switch and go from combat mode to normal mode. Took time, took processing, took dealing with what you'd seen and done. Some guys handled it well, could compartmentalize, could separate combat from everything else. Others struggled, couldn't turn it off, couldn't stop being on edge, couldn't relax. Took weeks or months to adjust. Some never fully did. Carried the war with them for the rest of their lives. PTSD wasn't understood in '66, wasn't recognized, wasn't treated. Men just had to deal with it on their own. Some did, some didn't. Some self-medicated with alcohol or drugs. Some pushed it down and tried to ignore it. Some talked it out with buddies who'd been there. Everyone found their own way, or didn't find a way and suffered. That was the reality of post-combat adjustment. And Day 9 was the beginning of that process for the soldiers of Operation Abilene. The fighting was almost over, but dealing with what they'd been through was just beginning. April 8th, 1966, Day 10, final day of Operation Abilene. The extraction began in the morning, helicopters coming in, loading soldiers, flying them out, back to base, back to Lai K, back to the First Infantry Division headquarters. The operation was over, time to count the cost, time to assess what had been accomplished, time to determine if it was worth it. The statistics told one story: 10 days of operations, multiple battalions engaged, thousands of soldiers involved, enemy casualties estimated at over 600 killed. Probably accurate within a range, bodies counted, blood trails documented, intelligence from captured prisoners. The numbers were real. The VC had taken heavy losses. Their 9th Division had been hit hard. Would take months to recover, to rebuild, to replace casualties, to become combat effective again. By the metrics of attrition warfare, Operation Abilene was a success, a clear tactical victory. Enemy forces engaged and destroyed. Objectives met. But the American casualties were staggering for a single operation in early '66. 72 killed in action. Over 200 wounded, almost 300 casualties total. For 10 days of operations. Those numbers would become routine later in the war, but in April '66, they were shocking. They represented significant losses, entire platoons wiped out. Companies combat ineffective. The human cost was real. Painful, permanent. The 72 dead had names, had families, had futures that would never happen. They came from all over America, farm towns and big cities, rich families and poor families, all races, all backgrounds, united by one thing: they'd served and they died serving. In a jungle in Vietnam, in an operation most Americans had never heard of, fighting an enemy most Americans didn't understand. For objectives that would be meaningless a year later when the VC rebuilt and returned. That was the tragedy. Not that they died. Soldiers die in wars. That's always been true. But that they died for so little strategic gain. That the ground they'd fought for wouldn't be held. That the enemy they'd killed would be replaced. That the operation would be forgotten. That was the tragedy. The wounded numbered over 200. Some would recover fully. Return to duty. Finish their tours, go home, build lives, put Vietnam behind them as best they could. Others would carry permanent injuries, missing limbs, paralysis, traumatic brain injuries, disfigurement. Lives fundamentally altered by what happened during Operation Abilene. They'd go home, but they'd never fully leave Vietnam behind. Would carry it in their bodies, in their limitations. In the stares from people who saw their injuries, in the questions about what happened, in the memories that never fully faded. And then there were the psychological casualties, the invisible wounds. Every man who fought in Operation Abilene was changed by it, some more than others. But all changed. You can't experience combat and not be affected. Can't watch friends die and be the same person you were before. Can't kill other human beings and have it not impact you. Combat changes people. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Usually both. You become harder, tougher, more capable, but also more damaged, more scarred, more aware of your own mortality and the fragility of life. That awareness stays with you, colors everything, makes you different from people who haven't experienced it, creates a divide that's hard to bridge. The operational assessments were written, after-action reports, lessons learned, what worked, what didn't, tactics that were effective, mistakes that cost lives, all documented, all analyzed, all distributed to other units. The institutional knowledge grew. The Army became slightly better at fighting in Vietnam, slightly more effective, slightly better at keeping soldiers alive while accomplishing missions. That learning was valuable, was necessary, but it was bought in blood. 72 dead soldiers worth of learning, 200 wounded soldiers worth of experience. That was the price of institutional knowledge, a price paid by young Americans who didn't get to benefit from the lessons their sacrifice taught. The strategic impact of Operation Abilene was minimal. The 9th VC Division had been hurt, but not destroyed, not driven from the area permanently. Within months, they'd rebuild, would return to operations, would control the same areas they'd controlled before. The ground fought over during Abilene wouldn't be held, couldn't be held without permanent occupation, and there weren't enough troops for that. So the VC would come back, would re-establish control, would continue operations. The cycle would repeat, operation after operation, battle after battle. Americans would fight and die for ground that wouldn't be held, for objectives that wouldn't be sustained. That was the fundamental strategic problem in Vietnam, and Operation Abilene demonstrated it clearly. The political impact was non-existent. Operation Abilene wasn't big enough to make news back home, wasn't dramatic enough to capture attention. Just another operation in a war that was still ramping up. The 72 dead were added to the total. The wounded were added to the count. But there were no headlines, no national attention. Just routine war coverage. Americans in '66 still largely supported the war, trusted that the government knew what it was doing, believed the war could be won. That would change. But not yet. Not in April '66. The turning point was still 2 years away. Tet 68 was when public opinion would shift decisively, when the war would become unpopular, when the protests would grow. But in April '66, most Americans still believed, still supported, still trusted. Operation Abilene didn't change that, didn't move the needle, was just part of the war effort that Americans assumed was working. The soldiers who fought in Operation Abilene went back to their units, rested for a few days, then went back out. More operations, more patrols, more combat, because the war continued. Operation Abilene was over, but there would be other operations, other battles, other casualties, for another 7 years, until 1973 when American ground combat operations ended. And even then, the war would continue for 2 more years before North Vietnam finally won in '75. All those operations, all those battles, all those deaths, and North Vietnam won anyway. That's the hard truth. The strategic failure that tactical success couldn't overcome. But tactical success and individual courage still matter. The soldiers of Operation Abilene did their jobs, did them well, fought with courage, protected their buddies, accomplished their missions. That matters, regardless of strategic outcome, regardless of what happened years later. The individual acts of courage and sacrifice during Operation Abilene were real, were meaningful, deserve to be honored. The men who fought there deserve recognition, deserve to have their story told, deserve to be remembered. Operation Abilene is forgotten by most, a footnote in the larger Vietnam War history. Not famous like Ia Drang or Khe San or Hue or just another operation in '66. But to the men who fought there, to the families of men who died there, it's not forgotten. It's remembered. It's honored. The names of the 72 killed are on the wall in Washington, panel after panel of names, including the names from Abilene. Those names represent real people, real lives, real families, real loss. And they deserve our memory, our respect, our honor. The legacy of Operation Abilene is like the legacy of so many Vietnam operations. Tactical success, strategic futility, individual courage, institutional failure, men doing their jobs perfectly while the larger strategy was flawed, soldiers accomplishing missions that didn't accomplish strategic objectives. That's the tragedy of Vietnam. That's what makes it different from previous American wars. That's what makes it so hard for veterans and for the nation to process. But we owe it to the men who fought to tell their stories, to remember their service, to honor their sacrifice. Operation Abilene happened. Real men fought there. Real men died there. That can't be undone, can't be changed, can only be remembered and honored and studied so that future generations understand the cost of war, the price that soldiers pay, the sacrifice that families make, the permanent loss that war creates. So, this is the story of Operation Abilene, March 30th to April 8th, 1966. 10 days. 72 Americans killed, over 200 wounded, 600 plus enemy killed. A tactical victory, a strategic nothing. A forgotten battle in a controversial war, but a battle that deserves to be remembered. Because the men who fought there deserve to be remembered. Their courage deserves recognition. Their sacrifice deserves honor, and their story deserves to be told. The veterans of Operation Abilene went on to serve out their tours. Some survived, some didn't. Some became casualties in later operations, died in different battles, in different places, but carried the memory of Abilene with them to the end. Others made it home, returned to America, tried to resume normal lives. Some succeeded, built careers, raised families, became contributing members of society, used their military experience as foundation for civilian success. They were the lucky ones, the ones who could compartmentalize, who could process the trauma, who could move forward. Others struggled, came home broken. PTSD that wasn't recognized or treated. Nightmares, flashbacks, hypervigilance, inability to hold jobs or maintain relationships. Some self-medicated, alcohol, drugs, anything to numb the pain, to quiet the memories, to make the nightmares stop. Some ended up homeless, on the streets, veterans who'd served their country with honor, ending up forgotten and abandoned, sleeping under bridges. That's a national shame. We sent them to war. They did what we asked, and then we failed them when they came. Home. That's on all of us. That's a debt we still haven't fully paid. The families of the 72 killed carry their grief forever. Parents who outlived their sons. A parent's worst nightmare. Wives who became widows. Children who grew up without fathers. Siblings who lost brothers. The ripple effects of those 72 deaths spread wide, touched hundreds of people, changed hundreds of lives. Those families deserved better, deserved more than a telegram and a flag, deserved a country that honored their loss, that recognized their sacrifice, that didn't forget. Some did get recognition. Some received medals, bronze stars, silver stars, a few distinguished service crosses, recognition for valor under fire, for courage in combat, for actions above and beyond. Those medals mattered to some families, gave them something to hold on to, something to be proud of. But to other families, the medals were cold comfort, didn't bring back their sons, didn't fill the void, were just metal, and ribbon that couldn't replace a life lost. The First Infantry Division continued operations in Vietnam for another 4 years, conducted hundreds more operations, lost thousands more soldiers, killed tens of thousands of enemy fighters, fought with distinction and courage, upheld the Big Red One tradition. But in the end, North Vietnam won. The South Vietnamese government fell. The Americans withdrew. All those operations, all those battles, all those deaths, and the war was lost. That's the hard reality that every Vietnam veteran has to live with. We did our jobs, we won our battles, but we lost the war. That's difficult to process, difficult to accept. But it's the truth. The lessons from Operation Abilene were applied to future operations. Tactics were refined. Procedures were improved. The Army got better at fighting in Vietnam. But it was never enough. The tactical improvements couldn't overcome the strategic problems. Couldn't win a war that probably couldn't be won, militarily. That required political solutions the United States couldn't or wouldn't achieve. So the tactical excellence that American soldiers displayed time and again, including during Operation Abilene, couldn't produce strategic victory. That's the frustration. That's what makes Vietnam so different from previous American wars. Today, over 50 years later, Operation Abilene is mostly forgotten. Ask random Americans about it, and they won't know what you're talking about. It's not taught in schools, not featured in documentaries, not part of the cultural memory of Vietnam. It's just another forgotten battle in a controversial war. But it shouldn't be forgotten. The men who fought there shouldn't be forgotten. Their courage and sacrifice shouldn't be forgotten. That's why we tell these stories. That's why we research and document and preserve the history, so that future generations know what happened, know what was sacrificed, know what war costs. The wall in Washington contains the names, panel after panel, over 58,000 names, including 72 from Operation Abilene. Those names are permanent, carved in stone, will be there as long as the memorial stands. That's important. That's right. Those men gave everything. The least we can do is remember their names. Visit the wall, touch the names. Remember that each one represents a life, a person, a family, not just a statistic, not just a casualty count. A human being who served and died. The broader lessons about war from Operation Abilene remain relevant. War is expensive, not just in money, but in lives, in families destroyed, in veterans damaged, in trust broken. Those costs are real, and they're paid for generations. The decision to go to war should never be made lightly, should never be made without understanding the full cost, should never be made without exhausting every other option. Because once you commit to war, once you send soldiers into combat, people die. And those deaths are permanent, and the grief never fully heals, and the cost never fully goes away. Operation Abilene also reminds us that tactical excellence isn't enough, that brave soldiers doing their jobs perfectly can't overcome flawed strategy, that you can win every battle and still lose the war if the strategic foundation is broken. That's a lesson military and political leaders need to remember, that sending soldiers to fight without a coherent strategy that can achieve political objectives is sending them to die for nothing. That's immoral. That's a betrayal of the trust soldiers place in their leaders. Operation Abilene and Vietnam as a whole demonstrated that, clearly. But despite all the strategic failure, despite all the political problems, despite the war being lost, the individual acts of courage during Operation Abilene matter. The soldiers who fought there mattered. Their service mattered. Their sacrifice mattered. That doesn't depend on strategic outcome. Doesn't depend on whether the war was won or lost. The courage is real regardless. The service is honorable regardless. The sacrifice is meaningful regardless. And that's what we remember. That's what we honor. The individual soldiers who did their duty, who fought with courage, who protected their buddies, who served their country. That matters. That will always matter. This was Operation Abilene. This was their battle. This was their war. And this is their story. May they never be forgotten. May their sacrifice never be diminished. May their courage always be honored. And may we learn from their experience so that future generations make better decisions about when and how to commit American soldiers to combat. That's the least we owe them, the absolute least. Remember, honor, learn. That's our obligation to the men of Operation Abilene and to all who served in Vietnam. An obligation we must never forget.